Welcome to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm with Mark Sanborn, best-selling author of The Fred Factor, right here. Mark, thanks for coming out here, and
My
great to have
pleasure.
you here in Malaysia.
Oh, it's great. It's my first trip to Malaysia,
Really?
so I'm delighted to be here.
Wow, okay. And you're going to have a tour after this,
I
see
am.
the city a little bit.
A little bit.
Very
Like at
good.
KL, yes.
Hey, tell us a bit about yourself. I mean, you've been a professional speaker for many years now. You're one of the Hall of Famers, in the circuit. How do you get into the space, and what sort of tell us a bit about your transitions that you've had in your life and that's taken you to this point in time.
Sure, everybody gets into their business different ways, and it was the same for me as a speaker. I grew up on a farm. I was a farm kid. We raised dairy cattle and crops. And I was very involved in a club called 4-H, a youth organization, later the FFA, or Future Farmers of America, where I got my interest both in public speaking and in leadership.
From farming, huh? That's interesting.
Yes, it was through
I'm sure there's a story there.
an extracurricular program. I mean, my nearest neighbor, my grandparents lived across the street, and then about an eighth of a mile away was our next nearest neighbor. So I lived in rural Northeast Ohio in the United States. But my interest in leadership soon trumped my interest in agriculture. But agriculture was what got me pointed in the right direction. And today, after 31 years as a full-time professional speaker, I started speaking professionally in college at the age of 19. That's how I worked my way through college, as an after-dinner speaker.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
wow.
it was better than working at a Wendy's or a McDonald's restaurant.
But how, would you get gigs where people would call you and what would you speak on?
I would, to be honest, I probably did more book reports than I did speaking. I would talk about, quote, Zig Ziglar and Norman Vincent Peale and Robert Schuller and all the legends. But one of the things I say to my clients is we emulate to learn, but we innovate to earn. So
we innovate to earn.
Yes, most people start in their profession by emulating the successful people that went ahead of them. That's how we learn. The problem is when you stay stuck there. I realized after quite a few years in the business that if I only talked about what other speakers talked about, I would make them more successful and famous, and I'd stay the same. So I got very involved in developing my own framework, my own mental models, my own material.
And how does that happen? I mean, do you have to soak yourself in research, or is there a change that you have to make to get into that space?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be a practitioner, which is to say, don't talk about something you haven't done. It's really not congruent when somebody that's not made a lot of money tells others how to make money, or somebody that was never successful in selling tells others how to sell. And I've been involved in leadership at a state and a national level since I was literally 18 years of age. And so because of that, when I talk about leadership and having my own business, I have some experiences in addition to my clients. I've worked with some 2,600 clients now, and I've learned a great deal from not just my own experiences, but from the clients that I work with. Most of the clients that hire me are already among the most successful. That's the great irony. The people that most need to hear the message often won't pay for it. And the people who are already successful are so committed to getting better, they'll invest more and more. And what happens is it kind of creates a gap between the truly successful and the mediocre. But I've been blessed to learn a lot from my audiences, my clients. Writing a book is a way that I learn. I've written 8 books, and it forces, Christopher Marlowe, the Brit, said, writing traps the mind into doing its own thinking. So when you write a book, you learn a great deal about what you write about if you write a good book. And I've written on probably, depending on how you dice it up, about 5 or 6 different topics. But they're all underlaid by this idea that nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary. That's really the message of my work, that extraordinary and exceptional are a choice.
And you also talk a lot about passion. I know part of your Fred Factor was really to find the passion in yourself. I mean, how did you become so passionate about the public speaking space?
I'm not sure what sparked it. I would honestly say my initial interest was abysmal failure. My first speaking contest at the age of 10.
Wow.
I did so badly, I was so embarrassed. I can still remember, these many years later, what it felt like. And when you get to a point in life, and we all do, where we have setbacks or failures, you've got one of two choices. And we don't often think about it consciously, but the first choice is to say, well, that doesn't matter. Did that, done that, got the t-shirt. And what I found is, when you hear somebody say that doesn't really matter, more often than not, it does. It's just a way to kind of ease the pain.
But so you were 10 and you had this embarrassing moment.
Yeah, and
I mean,
but I
wouldn't
made
that
a
have-
different decision because my
Okay.
parents, you know, and I don't take credit at 10. I can't take credit for much of anything, but my parents had instilled in me this idea, and what it caused me to do is to say this really does matter. And it was the challenge of that failure that got me interested in speaking. My primary interest in speaking was to make up for my loss and to win a state competition. I later went on to win a national competition. And then I coupled that with my interest in leadership because I believe that leadership doesn't make a difference. I believe leadership makes the difference. You know, Leaderonomics is, of course, about that idea that personal leadership makes the difference in your life, organizational leadership makes the difference in your organization, and for that matter, whether it's politics or your community, the way you influence others really matters. It makes the difference in the success of an organization, a community, or a nation.
You talked a little bit about exceptionalism being a choice. Just maybe briefly in 30 seconds or so before we close this segment.
Sure.
Tell us a bit about why is that a choice and how we can make that choice.
A lot of people were never taught to be exceptional or encouraged or rewarded for it. Matter of fact, some people were discouraged. You know, they came from a background where people criticized them or they diminished their dreams. But all of that still leaves you with the freedom to choose to be extraordinary, just to make a different choice. You know, that's what life is about. And if you wake up in the morning and you say, I choose to be today to make each moment as exceptional or as extraordinary as I can, that alerts you to that opportunity. And it's like anything, it's a skill that we learn and we develop, and over time then it becomes a habit.
Okay, Mark, we're going to take a quick break right now. We'll be right back after the break here with Mark Sanborn on the Leaderonomics Show. Welcome back to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm with Mark Sanborn. And Mark, you know, one of the books that I guess propelled you to fame is The Fred Factor. Tell us a bit about that book. Tell us a couple of insights. You know, I know passion is one. You talk about 3 or 4 different areas that, you know, Fred sort of exemplified that brought out the leader in him. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, first, it's interesting because I'd been speaking for many years before I had a best-selling book. I never actually thought I would ever have a best-selling book for the simple reason that I'm an economist by training and I understand statistics and odds, and the odds of having a best-selling book are pretty slim. Today, a lot of people say they have a best-selling book, but they really don't have the sales numbers to support it. So I will begin by saying that A, I was incredibly grateful that the message resonated, and B, the book came out of the speech. In other words, I was speaking about Fred Shea, the real-life postal carrier in Denver, Colorado, who took this really simple job of putting mail in a box and made it artistry. From that material that I developed as a speaker, I put it into a book, and to date it's sold somewhere between 1.6 and 2 million copies worldwide. When people ask me, you know, why do you think the book sold so well? I'm not sure, but I think it's because it's not about you know, Richard Branson or Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, because they're all billionaires. And when you're a billionaire, you have a lot of resources that you and I don't have.
Right.
The book's about a guy that has a very simple job that makes it extraordinary. And he proves the point that it's not the job you have, but how you do the job that matters. He kind of reinvented what it meant to be a postal carrier, and I dare say he may now be the most famous postal carrier I know in the United States, if not the world.
Yeah, and tell us a bit about why he was exceptional and why he, you know, he chose basically to make a difference and be different.
You know, I bought my first house. I was still single and living alone, and I lived in my new house all of about 2 days when there was a knock on the door, and it was Fred. Now, Fred was my postal carrier, and he introduced himself. He wanted to find out a little bit about me and what I did for a living. And it was the first time in my adult life I'd ever gotten a personal introduction to my postal carrier. I mean, think about that. You know, we do business with people every day, but we don't have a relationship because they didn't make time to get to know us and we didn't make time to get to know them. When Fred found out that I was a speaker and traveled a lot, he wanted my schedule so that he would only deliver my mail when I was there to receive it. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And I said, you know, Fred, that's not necessary. Why don't you just leave the mail in the box? You know, I had a big steel box on the side of the house there by the front door. And he pointed out that, you know, burglars watch for mail in the box. That's one of the ways they know you're gone. So he recommended a system where he would put mail in the box as long as the lid closed and nobody would see it. If that area, if the box was too full, he'd put mail in between the screen door and the front door. If that area became too full, then he'd hold my mail for me until I came back into town. You know, He was more worried about my mail than I was.
You were, yeah.
And that's how I define a professional. I say a professional is someone who's more worried about the solution to your problem their product or service solves than you are. Think about it. A solicitor, a good lawyer is more worried about your legal security and status than you are. A good educator, more worried about your son or daughter learning than you are. A good doctor, more worried about your health than you are. Now, sometimes when I talk about that, people misunderstand and they think that I'm encouraging dysfunctionalism, but I'm not. I mean, ultimately, we're responsible for our own lives, but our lives are so complex that if we find someone who will watch our back and take care of us, we become ultimately loyal. We never think about switching doctors or lawyers, and when our kids graduate, they come back to visit the teacher that made that difference in their life. So I think that all of us are really challenged to be like Fred in that we become indispensable to the people that we serve.
Right, and how, I mean, you come out with a couple of ways of how we can be like Fred.
Yes.
Right? What would be some of those?
Well, the book talks about 4 principles. And it's funny because I wrote the book as a business philosophy book. Most people buy it as a customer service book. I always say, as long as you buy it, I don't care what you call it. But you know, I think it's
and it's still out for sale.
It's
right?
Oh yeah, it's still in print,
Yeah.
and I wrote a sequel a few years ago called Fred 2.0. You know, I think that there are 4 principles that you build any business on. The first is knowing that everybody makes a difference, not that you can make a difference, because that's the subtle difference. You know, sometimes we tell our kids you can make a difference. That inadvertently teaches them that maybe they can opt out and be neutral. And I don't believe that. I think we're either making a positive difference or a negative difference. We're either building people up or diminishing them. We're either creating value or we're taking up space. So the first point is to realize and live with intentionality that you choose to be a positive difference maker every day. The second principle is it's all built on relationship. You know, every product and service is differentiated by the quality of the relationship that you have with the provider. The third principle is you can add value. Doesn't have to cost a nickel. That's my personal favorite because I've spent a lot of my career studying how do we add value by replacing money with imagination. And then the fourth principle is that you can and really must reinvent yourself regularly. You know, you wake up in the morning, you never want to get in a rut, you never want to be redundant, you never want to be burnout. And it's up to us to stay motivated and to bring the same passion to our work that we know makes it extraordinary.
You know, relationships are a cornerstone of a lot of businesses, and you postulate that. I mean, you started a blog with 5 friends called the 5 Friends blog, right?
Yes.
And today it's kind of not. Does it exist today? Or tell us a bit about that. I mean,
the 5 Friends
curious.
still exist. It's interesting that you asked that because we were 5 guys that have been friends for 20 years. We enjoyed good food, we enjoyed bourbon, we enjoyed good conversation, sharing books, ideas, and movie ideas. And over time, even though we were all competitors because we're all professional speakers in the US, we decided to collaborate. And we started to do a written blog, then we did a video blog, then we did an event in Las Vegas over a year ago. Then we did an intensive from that event in Las Vegas. And even though we're no longer working together as the 5 Friends, nothing bad happened, but 2 of us, Joe Calloway and I, had some different projects that we're pursuing, and Larry Winget and Randy Pennington and Scott McCain are still working together on something called the Ultimate Business System. We're still friends, and we still hang out. And what I think is important about the 5 Friends is the only thing better than becoming friends with the people you do business with is doing business with your friends. And we knew we were like-minded. We knew, and another thing that I think people appreciated is we all brought a different perspective. You know, it wasn't 4 friends because 2 people said the same thing. I mean, there were 5 people, but only 4 perspectives. It was 5 unique perspectives, and I think some people are challenged by that. We loved it. We loved to be able to. I'd say one thing, and Joe might take a different point of view, and Larry might take yet a different point of view. So we're still 5 Friends, but the brand is no longer blogging. That's not to say we might not down the road do some more things together.
But it's a great model for what businesses are today anyway, right? I mean, you have so many competitors.
Loose confederation.
Right.
You know, a loose confederation of cooperative competitors.
Very good. We're going to take another break right now, and we'll be right back with the final segment here on the Leaderonomics Show with Mark Sanborn. Welcome back to the final segment of the Leaderonomics Show here with Mark Sanborn. Mark, we always subject our guests to our Thinkonomics challenge, and you're not going to be an exception. So
All right.
you've got a minute to answer as many questions as you can, right?
Okay.
Let's go. Would you accept advice from a younger person? Why?
Not only would I accept it, I would seek it because they have a different perspective than I have, and that would be very helpful.
Fabulous. Which is more genuine, giving your time or giving your money?
Both are genuine, but I believe giving your time is harder than giving your money. The more money you have, the less time you have. So you're more likely to give money than time. The less time you have, or the more time you have, generally the less money you have. So personally, I think the greatest investment we make is when we give our time.
Great. Do you think it's all right to always give but not receive anything in return?
I think when you give, you do receive in return. Even if you're not recognized for it, you have the satisfaction of doing the right thing. So I think it's impossible to truly give and not receive.
All right. If you could choose an age, how old would you be and why?
The age I'm right now, I think every age is the right age. When I had my boys, people would say, oh, 3 is such a great age, or 5 is such a great age. I've enjoyed my boys at every age, and I've enjoyed my life at every age.
And you have 2 boys, right?
I have 2 boys, yes.
All right. And final question, I think we just have time for this. Researchers say that you can be an expert at anything if you practice 10,000 hours. Do you agree?
I agree if the practice is deliberate. You've got to have, as Anders Ericsson says, intentionality and feedback and challenge, or else the practice isn't going to pay off.
And deliberate practice meaning you've intentional, like in terms of
You've
coaching
got
and
goals, you've got feedback, and you're challenged by what you do. A lot of people practice things they already know, and you've got to continue to increase the depth of your skill set.
Now, you talk about this in your new book, right?
I do.
The
Potential
Principle. Tell us a bit about that, and tell us about when the book is coming out.
Sure, the book comes out September 5th this year. It will be published by Nelson. It will be distributed in Malaysia by MPH. I'm excited because the potential principle is very simple. We all know how good we've become, but none of us know how good we could be. I've never met anybody that could claim with certainty they'd achieve their full potential. We always have the potential to get better. Most of the clients and achievers that I work with, they're so good that their challenge isn't becoming good, it's becoming good and continuing to get better. You know, it's easy to go from 5th to 4th or from 4th to 3rd, but when you're number 1, there's nobody out in front of you. There's nobody to emulate, there's nobody that you can follow. You're making it up on your own. And we've all seen companies that were very successful for a period, but were unable to sustain their success. So I basically in the book talk about 4 areas in which you can and should improve, and 4 techniques for how to improve. So that's the book in its essence, 4 areas where you should and can improve, which are thinking, performing, reflecting, and learning, and 4 techniques for improvement.
And talk, speaking about companies that, we've seen companies that, reach a peak and then, majority of them, kind of fall. But there are a few exceptions, the General Electrics, there's some that 100 odd years, they're still up there.
True.
The Johnson & Johnsons. There are a couple out there. What do you think, for an individual, you talk about these 4 things, but do you think organizationally there are elements that these guys have or have embedded in place that enable them to have such sustainability?
I do. I think truth is transferable. I think the same things that allow us to get better allow them to get better. And the first is being proud but never satisfied. People say, never be satisfied, but if you're never satisfied, then you get burnt out because you don't operate from a sense of pride. So I say be proud of what you've accomplished, just don't be satisfied with it. I call that concept positive discontent. Positive discontent allows you to do both. Take pride in what you've achieved in the past, but not settle for not achieving more success in the future. I also think that the only thing that gets better with age accidentally is wine. People have to choose to get better. And I've never worked with a company or an individual that accidentally got better. It just doesn't happen. You have to have the intention of getting better, and you have to have a system for getting better, or you won't.
And if you happen to be in a crowd of CEOs, say at 500 CEOs, and you had to address them in a speaking engagement, what advice would you impart? Any pearls of wisdom that you'd give to these guys?
Well, very simple, but I think important advice, and that is don't confuse activity with accomplishment. Today's CEOs are so busy, they're in meetings. Matter of fact, the majority of a CEO's day is spent in meetings. And very often at the end of the day, they go home and they've been busy, but they haven't accomplished anything. Ironically, sometimes to accomplish more, you have to do less. You have to narrow your focus to know what's really important and to spend more time doing it. I always say that activity or busyness is the anesthesia of the ineffective leader. In other words, we feel good because we're busy, but we may not be accomplishing anything.
I think it holds true for individuals also, right?
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed, for anyone.
But how does one do that? I mean, because there, somehow activities seem to take over, this whole urgent, versus importance things. But how does one actually figure out a process to say, let me take away, let me really prioritize, let me really zoom in into activities that will enable me to accomplish things?
I talk about that in my book, You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. I say you need to identify your MVP activities. Now in sports, MVP typically means most valuable player. But I use it differently. I say most valuable and profitable activities. That is to say, if you do 188 different things a day, which we all do, what are the 6 to 8 most valuable and profitable activities that produce the most results? Now, once you've identified them, and that's hard to do, the first time I did this exercise probably 25 years ago, it took me 2 weeks to kind of come up with a list. The next step's even harder, and that is you schedule, you plan 60 to 80% of every day to do those things. What happens is people, we give important people appointments on our calendar, but for some odd reason we don't give important work an appointment. That means that the important work gets driven out by the unimportant work. So what you do is you identify your most valuable and profitable activities, and then you spend 60 to 80% of every day. That means you still have 20 to 40% of every day to do the stuff that you can't get away from, the distractions, interruptions, etc.
Okay. Final question. If you were addressing a group of young people just graduating from university or college, what advice would you impart to them?
Well, I gave this advice to my brother when he graduated from high school. I wrote it on his graduation card many years ago. I said, whatever you choose to do, do it better than anybody else. Be the best, aim to be the best at what you do, and you'll succeed.
All right, Mark. Thank you so much for your advice.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks.
Thanks.
We're here with Mark Sanborn here on the Leaderonomics Show.